Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net with another Memories of Maniac, and this time we're going to be talking way back, about 10 years back actually, with a story that's kind of personal and kind of close to my heart, but you know, I kind of been wanting to tell this on the site for quite a while, and I figured why not share it with you guys and see what you have to say about it. My freshman year in college was 2002 to 2003, and I had decided that I was going to be going to a school that was as literally far away as I could possibly imagine. I had grown up on the East Coast and I hated every second of it. It was cold, it constantly snowed. In fact, I think that winter that before I left was probably one of the longest winters on record. Not because it was a lot of snow. In fact, I don't even think we got much snow that year. It was just constantly overcast and freezing temperatures. Like, I don't know. It must, and I think that I think that winter lasted probably somewhere until June. March typically it got warmer around March, and no, it was freaking June until it actually got to reasonable temperatures. And I was just done. I was done living on the East Coast. I wanted to move to the West Coast, which I had vacationed at previously, and it was iconic. I'm a huge movie buff, and it just seemed like all the major studios of things that I wanted to do with my life, whether it be game studios or movie studios or any other type of stuff, if I wanted to get something done with my life, then I needed to be on the West Coast, basically in the heart of the action. Now that's since it's not as big a monopoly on everything as this was 10 years ago, but it just seemed to me, bright-eyed 18-year-old kid, if I wanted to be able to do anything with my life that was things I wanted to do, I would have to be living on the West Coast. I would have to be living in Southern California or something. It just seemed like everything was happening over there at the time. E3 was over there. Most of the major game studios were over there. And plus the schools I wanted to go to were all over there. So it just seemed like the place where I wanted to be. So I move out to California and I go to the school, and I really don't want to mention this school because let me tell you, what I have to say about this school is not complimentary, which is probably the nicest thing that I could say about that school because I have nothing nice to say about it. Needless to say, let me just give one example. You couldn't pay your bill online. They wouldn't even accept credit card payments in person. This was a school that was touting itself as one of the most technologically advanced schools with the most technologically advanced curriculum that you could find at the time. And you couldn't pay your bill online. But I was a freshman. And I was willing to let all this stuff slide and everything else because I didn't know any better. And I spent a year living out there, and I love living in California. I'm loving every second of it. It didn't rain, I think we got maybe 1 week of rain a year. You could do anything. Like, there was like a million different things. I mean, I could go to a freaking comedy show every week and see somebody famous for $15, every week. The first month I was there, I saw the late Robert Schimmel, I saw Damon Wayans, I saw D.L. Hughley, I saw Dennis Miller, who I liked at the time. I mean, I could visit. It was iconic. I could visit the Santa Monica Pier. I could go out to Venice Beach. I could do, all this great, all these cool things. E3. I could go to E3, which I did. My first year of E3 was that year. So all these great things. I had all these great opportunities. But the school was terrible. I was miserable because the school was bad. I was miserable because of the curriculum was not right for me, and I was miserable because the school was completely backwards in how it was operating. And I decided that I was probably going to be seeking other education elsewhere. And after a year, I left the school and went back and basically finished off my degree. And I have my degree now in a completely different field than what I originally intended to go for. But I now have my degree, and I I'm done. I'm done with my education now. But I cannot tell you how surprised I was my sophomore year of college, back here of all places, to see that, oh my God, I could pay my bill online? Wait, I could go in person and pay by credit card? No, this can't be real. And they just looked at me like, I was like, what? Yes, no, you can pay online. You can register for your classes online. Wow, really? I can do that? And you mean I don't have to fill out punch cards? Oh my gosh. That was a surprise. So I spent the rest of my college years back on the East Coast and finding myself enjoying it quite a bit, I guess you would say, after that. I actually did have a pretty good college experience. So needless to say, I did miss California for a lot of reasons. As I said, I did actually enjoy living out there. There was a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of great things, stuff that you still can't get over here. A lot of more businesses, a lot of more business was out there. A lot of more opportunity, I thought, was out there for the things I wanted to do. And it was just iconic. Like you couldn't cross the street without seeing the street name, and it was named after a song. Or see, even the truck stops. It's like, wait, wasn't this the spot that I'm saying that was in that one movie or something like that? Or over there, is that, wait, I know this street. I know that area. I mean, it can't be. It's like, no, it was. So, needless to say, even though I was happy where I was education-wise, I still was I still missed what it was to be like out in California. I look back on that year fondly, actually. Even though I did say that I had a bad experience, I still look back on that year quite fondly. So, 2004 comes around, and probably one of the biggest releases of 2004, and I admit this was a big year for games, was Half-Life 2. It came around, I think it was November 22nd, 2004 was its exact release date, if I remember. If not, it was some, give or take a day. I believe it was November 22nd or 21st or something like that was when Half-Life 2 came out. And of course, this was a big Steam release, and this was Steam's big day to shine. So, I got my pre-order, I had preloaded it, I was a big PC gamer, actually. That was what I did. I built high-end gaming rigs for myself, or I took, I basically upgraded or heavily upgraded gaming rigs that I would have. And treated them very well. But needless to say, I was a big, really into that stuff. I'd play all the PC games I could. I didn't play consoles, really. In fact, I hadn't gotten, I think maybe the year prior I had gotten a GameCube. And that year, I had picked up an Xbox just to play Halo 2. And it would be another year before I picked up a PlayStation 2. But PC was what I wanted. And I remembered reading a preview. I had every issue of PC Gamer. That surprised me. It was a game that had a title of it, The Other Source Engine Game. Now, part of the reason why I really was interested in Half-Life 2 was because I was one of the first people to actually see Half-Life 2 demoed back at E3 2003. I walked 8 blocks to go see it. I mean, that game wowed me. That engine wowed me. And I was really impressed by the fact that there was going to be a game coming out so close to the release of Half-Life 2, because, Valve was licensing the engine out to anybody who was willing to pay for it. That there was going to be somebody else using the Half-Life technology. That impressed me quite a bit. So I was like, well, what is this game? And I open up the article and I start reading it, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It's a game about vampires. Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines. Now, some of you probably know Vampire: The Masquerade as an old-style RPG, pen and paper RPG, similar to like how Dungeons and Dragons is a pen and paper RPG. It is a property just like Dungeons and Dragons, only instead of dragons and dungeons, you're vampires in a modern-day setting. It's the world of darkness. Now, the world of darkness is the world we're in right now, basically, which is kind of what made it really cool. everything that you think might be real is actually in fact real. In fact, I'm looking over my shoulder right now in case if anything happens to me, just you know, if I don't, maybe I shouldn't be telling all this, but everything that you thought about, ghosts or werewolves or vampires are all real. It's the fact that the people that are not involved in this world don't really know about it, or aren't supposed to know about it. Would vampires, if they did in fact exist, want people to know that they in fact exist? No, they're spook stories or urban legends or something, which is the way they like it. So I always liked my fantasy grounded in a little bit of reality. Well, I admit I did like a lot of far out there fantasy, Star Wars probably being, the biggest. I always liked my fantasy kind of grounded. It kind of just made it a bit more believable or plausible to me. I kind of liked I like fantasy concepts. I always go into the fantasy section whenever I'm in a bookstore, that sort of thing. But I always liked grounded, and for me, the World of Darkness seemed to be grounded fantasy. So I would start reading the preview about Vampire Bloodlines, and I'm amazed by what I'm reading. The developers were basically saying that they were taking Southern California, and they were basically making it available in the game. They were digitizing environments, or they were replicating environments digitally that we knew in some cases they had to change the names. But for the most part, they were going to be doing very faithful representation of what these environments look like. Now, I know what you guys are probably saying. Wait, I know this stuff. Wait, haven't you played Infamous Second Son or the Grand Theft Autos after, Grand Theft Auto 4, Grand Theft Auto 5 or something like that? Haven't you played those? It's no big deal anymore to be replicating a real world environment digitally. And I would say yes, it is. It is kind of common nowadays, but not back then. Most of the games, this was, like I said, this was 2004. Most of the games I had played were purely fantastic environments, not realistic. Nothing was, even though they might even use names, I can't really remember any games that were truly able to really replicate actual environments. Maybe Cruising USA, and that was just inspired by the different world environments and stuff like that. I don't think that there's an actual $100 bill tunnel in Washington, D.C. Quote, you can post a comment if I'm wrong. But for the most part, no, I don't really remember any actual games, at least not on the PC, at least none that I played, that were really, truly inspired by real world environments. Most of them were just fantastic environments. Mars or Star Wars worlds or stuff like that. So needless to say, the article preview got my attention, but I was kind of focusing on a lot that month. Halo 2, obviously, like I said, came out that month, so that was a big thing. Half-Life 2 came out that month, in fact, the same day, so that got a lot of my interest. So needless to say, I kind of got lost in the Vampire Blood. I didn't really follow up on previews for Vampire Bloodlines or anything like that. So the game gets released. I play through Half-Life 2 as soon as I possibly can. But I'm frequenting the gaming message boards, and I'm frequenting a lot of the major gaming websites at the time, like GameSpy and IGN and stuff like that. And it seems like everybody's writing about this one game. The reviews are coming out basically for this game called Vampire Bloodlines, which I had remembered from the PC Gamer article. And I got to admit that a lot of the reviews were not complimentary about the game. It got about a 75%, at least as far as I can remember. I'm sure the Metacritic is different, but at the time, I don't even remember a Metacritic. But I would say on average, the game was probably getting about a 75% score, which to me was not a high score. But I did read the reviews. And even though the scores weren't high, particularly because the game was buggy, and Troika Games, the guys who made Vampire Bloodlines, was notorious for games that were buggy. They would at least have a really, really good game, a really, really immersive environment. And that was what the reviews mentioned. And even though I was a guy who played only first-person shooters on the PC back then, I was really, really ingrained in that. I didn't like RPGs with the exception of Anachronox. I didn't think I would enjoy this game until they basically said that, no, the game has got a lot. It's like they basically described it like a prototypical Deus Ex, but with a bit more focus on combat, which interested me immediately. So one day around Christmas time, either, I don't remember, I think I might have gotten a coupon or it might have been on sale, or I don't even know if it was before Christmas or after Christmas. I was like, you know what, I gotta go to the store and I gotta pick out the Empire Bloodlines, just to see what it is. And I remember that it was only 40 bucks. It was like 30 or 40 bucks. And that was cheap because games launch at a price of 50. And this game hadn't been out for a month. So for a game to be at that price that soon was kind of surprising. So I pick up the game and I put it in my computer and I start loading it up. And immediately I was immersed in the world of darkness. Like I said before, I was always inspired by these grounded realities and things like that, the games that would really pull you towards this. But more than that, like I said before, I had lived in California for a year. It felt like I had come home. It felt like I was back. As the game starts up, you go through this tutorial basically showing you all the different things that you can do after creating a character, and you got these cool characters that all have, everybody seemed like they all had their own agenda, yes, but everything still seemed like these were actual people. These weren't animated cartoon characters voiced by people on, lowest common denominator or lowest pay scale. John DiMaggio was in this game, and was played one of the, Smiling Jack. A lot of great voice actors were used in this game. To say nothing of the fact that the animations, because they had used a source engine, the animations were great. The graphics were very top of the line. They weren't as good as Half-Life 2's because they chose to use hand-drawn textures as opposed to photorealistic textures, which is what was in Half-Life 2. That was an artistic choice. That wasn't a technical limitation. The source engine could do either. I still liked it. I still thought it was really awesome. And you could just kind of screw around in Santa Monica, which was your, you could do all these things. They had radio shows. And I know that Grand Theft Auto 3 had radio shows, but I liked the Dead of Night radio shows. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The first thing you do in the game is you create a character sheet. You pick your clan, you create a character sheet. The problem was that I didn't know the World of Darkness. I didn't know the rules of the World of Darkness. For those of you who do, you would be right at home with that. The thing was that I wasn't. But the game did something for newbies that I thought was really awesome. You could pick any Camarilla clan you wanted. It was pretty open-ended. You could pick whatever skills you wanted. And no matter, basically, whatever task you did, whatever you completed was what levels you up. You could only level up by completing side quests and things like that. You couldn't level up by beating things or killing things or headshots or things like that. That wasn't indicative. The game wanted you to quest to get experience, not to do other things. You didn't get quests for feeding or you didn't get XP for feeding or anything like that. You only got it for quests. And I thought that was really cool. So, for those who were newbies to the game series, you could choose to fill out a brief questionnaire. It asks you some questions about yourself, and in knowing that, it would basically say, oh, you're of this clan, you're of a Tremere, you're of a Gangrel, or you're of a Nosferatu, or you're of a, what do you call it, a Malkavian, or something like that. It would pick your clan for you. And I thought that was a really cool way to make people that were uninitiated to the series, get them a way to initiate them. So the first time I played it, I took the questionnaire, and I actually was named Adventurer. Which, by the way, is a very tough clan to start off with, because you can't get any blood from rats. There's a segment where basically the only food source is rats, and you gotta basically be stocking up on blood packs. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So, the other thing that I want to mention is how accurate this thing was. I actually did have some friends who I met after having played and finished the game who did know the World of Darkness rules and the Masquerade and everything else. Who basically had already picked clans for themselves, known, had determined, oh, I'm actually a Tremere or something. I know in my heart I should be a Tremere. Took the questionnaire. Sure enough, they were, your clan is Tremere. I had another friend who's like, kind of a little crazy and everything else. He's like, yeah, you're a Malkavian. Yeah, knew it. Knew it. And so that questionnaire was, I don't know who wrote that questionnaire, but they knew what they were talking about. They really did. They knew how to make that questionnaire properly. My later playthroughs I would pick my own clan. By that point I was familiar with the mechanics, so I would pick my own clan and create my own character sheet. But trust me, by the end of probably the first, by the first time I started, within the first couple of quests, by the time I ended the first area, I was familiar with the mechanics and everything, so I wasn't too complaining about that. So it was a mixture of three things that I think was really what made this game so close to my heart. One was the environments, the Southern California environments. The second was the game's grounded reality. The way the game opened up, you don't play as a vampire immediately. Well, you do play as a vampire immediately, but the way the game opens, it opens just as you're being turned. And how are you being turned, basically? Well, you met some member of the opposite sex in a bar. You didn't know they were a vampire. They were a vampire. They handcuffed you to the bed during I'm assuming it was some kinky sex or something like that. And turned you during that process, I guess. As soon as that happens, some vampire police bust in, stake both you and your, I don't remember what the word is, and your vampire companion. Sire, that's it, sire. Takes you and your sire and basically holds you with the prince. Basically has you with the other kindred of the area. Kindred's another word for vampires. It's what vampires call themselves, a kindred. With the other kindred of the area, basically hold a formal trial. Now, the punishment in vampire society, as per the rules of the Masquerade, are if if a vampire turns another vampire, or intends to turn another vampire, they must get the blessing of the person in charge. They must at least seek the blessing of the person in charge. Typically it is given unless there's some extenuating circumstances, like vampire population might be too high, or the person you want to turn is a child. Typically they don't turn children. Needless to say, it would have been given or something like that. What did happen instead was that this person did not seek approval, and the punishment for that is death, both for the sire and for the kind. I'm sorry, the child. Kind is another. And for the child, which is basically where the game starts off. The game starts off in what is supposed to be your execution. It turns out that what happens instead is somebody basically vouches for you, who is not, is trying who the prince is trying to get on his good side. And basically your life is spared. And you basically become this person who's being taught the ways of the vampire and this sort of thing. Taught the rules of the Masquerade, because the Masquerade is important. The Masquerade is basically the way that the vampires can survive. I mean, if it wasn't for the Masquerade, the vampires knew, and I'm sure that everybody would know, what would happen? They'd be, there would be witch hunts. There would be, fire and pitchforks and everything. I mean, if people knew that, immediately they'd be sought out and they'd probably be executed. And probably a few others, probably some pretty horrible ways, fire or whatever. So needless to say, that really impressed me. And the first character that you meet and talk to was, of course, John DiMaggio's character, Smiling Jack, who's really impressed me. He goes through a pretty awesome tutorial where you learn the game's mechanics very well, and then you're basically left in Santa Monica in an apartment left by you, left by the prince. Not a very good one, but an apartment nevertheless, and you're basically left to explore the world. You can take on missions, you can take on side quests, whatever you want, that sort of thing. I don't want to spoil anything about the game, really. I basically just talked about its opening. But it's obvious that this was a world that there are no angels. And I like that. I thought that was kind of cool. It was like nobody was an angel, but it wasn't depressing. Another thing was that you had to decide who you trusted. You had to decide who you didn't trust. You had to survive, just like you would in real life. And the cool thing is like as a vampire, you're a night person. And I am a night person. I'm a real world night person. I liked being a night person. And I don't know, I just felt right at home. This game, the game company that made this game went belly up right after the game was released, which was really disappointing. They were able to release, I think, one major patch right before the game had, just to stabilize it. They didn't do the world's best job stabilizing it, even with the patch getting released. But it was, at the very least, playable. I think there's still a memory leak in the game or something like that. But I know there have been people that have been patching the game and modding the game for many years since. Most of the time, like bluesnews.com does a piece whenever they release a new version. But I always thought those patches kind of adapted the game a bit too much, like changed the game mechanics. I preferred the game the way it was at release. I know there were probably a lot of things like multiplayer or other side quests and a lot of dialogue that's in the game itself that, is not something that I mean, there's probably like KOTOR 2 levels of content that was probably deleted just for this game to make a deadline. But I still liked it a lot. The game is on Steam. You can probably purchase it on Steam. Activision published it. I don't think it's been published on Good Old Games or anything like that, but I know it was on Steam. I actually did pick up a Steam copy because I didn't want to have to constantly be loading up discs. So I actually bought it again on Steam when it was on sale. I know that if Troika had survived the game's release, they were actually starting work on something that was probably more Fallout inspired than it was Vampire inspired. They were not going to do a sequel to Vampire Bloodlines. And unfortunately, the game's ending, without spoiling anything, didn't really fit itself to a sequel. In fact, actually, even the publisher of the Vampire Masquerade RPG admitted that this game was considered in canon with the Vampire Masquerade Gehenna event, which is what ended the Vampire the Masquerade rules, so that the World of Darkness could be relaunched. Yes, New 52 fans, relaunching and rebootings were happening even back then. And they do happen even for RPGs. Although probably everybody was saying, well, Dungeons & Dragons 5th anniversary, 5th edition is coming out this year, so neither is to say, I guess. But I really wish that they had released a sequel to this game. In fact, actually, I had listed this game as like one of my biggest sequel. One of the games I wish more than anything had actually gotten a sequel, and I was really disappointed about that. I know that even though Troika had not been able to release a sequel, I mean somebody else could have, but the World of Darkness has basically been relaunched. You couldn't. I just wanted to be able to. I really like these characters. I wanted to be able to play another game in this environment or with these characters, and unfortunately, that probably will not happen. The World of Darkness is completely different now.